Maybe more like that. All right, how you guys doing today? It's great to be here in Oklahoma. It's quite a bit different from where I usually am. This is what I consider my hometown now. I actually was born in Kansas, grew up there, but now I live in the Seattle area, just north of Seattle, actually, in a suburb called Everett. And I'm here visiting some family for the holidays, and it's great to be here and see the local tech scene here. It's pretty cool, this building. And I'll have to check out some more about Starship 46, and I hope to see you guys at some future coding events. I'll be here through New Year's. So, a little bit about me. I studied chemistry in college. I actually did not finish my bachelor's degree. I got kind of bored with chemistry. So I dropped out, joined the U.S. Army Reserves, and became a radiology tech. After that, or after my training period, I went to civilian status, and I worked for the FAA, and trained and certified and worked as an air traffic controller for over 6 years. And I've traveled a bit for that. I was actually here in Oklahoma several times for training. The big FAA Academy is down close to Mustang, Oklahoma. So I've actually been here a few times, and I was also here for basic training. So Oklahoma's got a whole bunch of good memories for me. I learned to code in my spare time. Everything I know is self-taught from books. Well, it's like a community effort in a sense, because it's from books and videos and everything else. So it's self-taught, but it's mostly because of the resources that other generous software developers have provided. And I now do full-time freelance development in the Seattle area. This month, I'm working out of Oklahoma City, which is one of the great things about freelance software development, is you can kind of work wherever you want to, as long as you've got high-speed internet, and you can be available for virtual meetings and such. And I'm also an adjunct professor at Seattle Central College. I sometimes teach evening courses there in web development. My favorite text editor, I'm not trying to start any flame wars, but my favorite text editor is Sublime Text. I'm on Sublime Text 3. I don't know if the screenshot is Sublime Text 3 or not. I think it is. And that's just my personal preference. My favorite programming language, I did notice in the Techlahoma Slack channel there was a poll, and I didn't see Sublime Text in the poll, so I had to make sure I mentioned that. My favorite programming language is Python, and I think this is the Python users group, so that's hopefully cool. I do a lot of work in JavaScript and PHP. That's just what clients oftentimes need. I use ES6 a lot. I do like it. I prefer Python, though. My second favorite language at this point in time is Swift, which I think has a lot in common syntactically with Python, and it's got a really nice development environment, at least for Mac, and they're working on some good tools for other OSs too. And that's my contact info. I can put it up later if you want to, but I'm on all those various social media platforms. So, one of the things I like to do when I'm giving a talk is quote one of my favorite authors, and that is Robert N. Richer, who wrote The Limits of Software. If you can find a copy of that book, I highly recommend it. He said, "The real scoop on programming and software is the human element. We are just like everyone, part this, part that, except we have to deal with enormous complexity, which springs upon us only after we are too far into what started out to be kind of fun, coding an algorithm and watching it run on a machine. But then it's too late. It all becomes work, very stressful work." How many of you guys can relate to that? Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, especially with some of the recent projects I've been working on. But when I'm coding in Python, and particularly Django, I feel like I'm never working. It always feels like fun. So I love Python and Django. So how have I used Django professionally? So a couple of recent projects. One, I've used it for small business. And I figured I'd show you what you can do with Django before I get too far into the Django details. So I had a small business in Pennsylvania that needed I think it's Pennsylvania, somewhere on the East Coast, needed a website. You should see their old website. I wish I'd taken a screenshot of it. I think it was literally designed in the late 90s. So this was a major change for them. And I'm not a designer, but I try. It was a trucking safety company, needed a new website. And they had to offer online training because they're finding that these trucking companies are becoming more diverse. The truckers are always on the road. They used to offer regular safety training courses in person at the trucking locations, but now the drivers are always on the road. So they needed to offer online training, test and track progress, and generate PDF certificates to certify that the drivers had completed their safety training. And it had to be done within a limited budget. I forget the exact budget, but it was pretty limited. So I spent a bit of time thinking, and I chose a Django web framework, which is made with Python, obviously. It has authentication and session management built in, so I didn't have to spend any time working on authentication or session management for the website. It has a robust ORM, which I actually like. Most ORMs I don't like. I don't like the way they set up database tables. I don't like the queries that they write, but the Django ORM I really love. In fact, there's a tool you can use in Django, and we might show it, where you can see what the SQL is generated from your Django models, and it's like exactly what I would do. So I don't know who wrote Django, but they like read my mind. And I use Django WK HTML to PDF, which is a C++ wrapped Django library to generate PDFs, which makes it easy to generate PDFs from a Django web template. Just here's a couple of screenshots of what we have here. It's just a very basic dashboard. Drivers can log in, click on courses, they take the courses, there's a question, there's a survey, or there's a test, it grades it, generates certificates if they pass. And this is all done really quickly, and it's all stored in the, actually I forget where these are stored. These might be stored in the cloud. But other ways I've used Django. Laboratory management system for a biotech company on the East Coast. They needed a way to manage their chemical processes, keep track of the data, everything that they do. So we created a new laboratory management system for them from scratch using Django, and this is a screenshot of it. It lets them basically just keep track of all their problems. They had constantly changing requirements. Their business is a startup itself, so it's pivoting all the time. There's new track orders, chemist progress, inventory, and more. And they needed features to automate some tedious tasks, analyze data collected, and present to investors. And of course, not only is Django a great web framework because it's written in Python, but Python is a great framework to use, or Python language-based frameworks are great for this kind of thing because they have all these different data analyzing libraries like pandas and NumPy, which we have used in this. So Django, use the Django OS framework to create a REST API to make the more rich, so that way the chemists don't have to constantly be reloading pages when they're changing data. And if you haven't used it yet, I'm actually going to demonstrate it here in a little bit. It's an amazing library it's a third-party library. I think it should be part of the Django framework, but it's just as good as the Django framework, and it works seamlessly with it. Django reversion is what we use to keep track of changes, because this is a sensitive work that they're doing here. They need to keep track of when a chemist puts something into synthesis, when they put it in HPLC or whatever else they do with their chemical procedures. So we use Django reversion to keep track of changes, and Django S3 storage to securely store all of their data sheets from their HPLC and mass spectrometry in the cloud. I am actually going to talk more about the permission management later, so let's skip that. So if I haven't mentioned it yet, I firmly believe Django is the best web framework currently available. I know that's like a loaded statement. It is only my opinion. You're obviously welcome to hold other opinions. It's my strongly held opinion. I've worked with several other frameworks, a lot of different PHP frameworks, a little bit of Ruby on Rails, a lot of .NET. Oh, not a lot, a little of .NET. And I've used Flask and other Python-based frameworks. And if I had to choose a framework for a new web project, I would choose Django without hesitation. It's not the most performant framework, I'll give you that. But when it comes to programmer productivity, I haven't found anything quite like Django. I do use Flask still for minimal websites that don't rely on database interactions or user authentication, just because if I'm going to go through all the work of setting up database, ORM, and user management, I'd just rather use Django. So we're going to start a Django project here to kind of demonstrate the framework. And some of these names that I've used, well, I'll just show you the script. Okay, let's go back to Sublime Text. So this is going to run, I know you can't see the left-hand side here, which is really tiny text, but this is going to run in a Docker setup here, Docker Compose. So I've got, you don't have to use Docker. I'm just using it because my system doesn't have Python 3. I didn't want to work with virtual environments right now. So I've got a Docker container set up here with MySQL, just a standard MySQL Docker, and then I've made a custom container for the Django Docker container, and it's just a Python-based Docker container. It just copies the code over. It adds a file called requirements.txt, which is what you list all your Python libraries for pip install. And then it just makes a directory and copies the code over and installs the requirements. That's all it does. It's a pretty simple container. And this is the command you would normally use to run a Docker. This is a command you'd normally use to run a Django web server. It's just manage pi, run server, and you can optionally specify the IP address and port to listen to. So to make this simpler, it's all in Docker. I made a script, because when you're running Docker, you have to put this in front of all your commands to run your command inside your Docker container. So I just made a quick alias here. You can choose any word you like. I have small children, so that was the first word that popped in my head that I knew wouldn't clash with anything. So that's the word I chose. So we're going to source the alias script, and then we're going to run that lovely command right there. And what that does, the Django Admin PI is part of the Django scripts that gets installed when you install the Django package with pip. Start project creates a new project, and you can call it whatever you want to, and then the dot is just we're going to put it in this folder. I'm going to make a simple website for horse trading because I've noticed that in Oklahoma, people love horses. A lot of people do. My sister does especially. And I went to a horse show this weekend, and I noticed that people are posting a lot of paper up on walls to sell and trade horses. So we're going to work on an API to sell horses, hopefully. So Django Admin.py start project, project name, and location creates the project structure, which is pretty simple. Then we're going to set up the database settings and run Docker Compose up to get it all going. So, oops, what do I got going on here? I got so many windows open. Okay, so yes, this is what I want. Okay, that's that. That's the Docker, and the command would be. Thank you. And actually, I don't know if I can do this because I've already ran this, so maybe I can't even do this. But it'd be start project horse trader dot. That would be the command. I guess I don't have to type these in because they're in the slideshow. But that will create this structure right here. Actually, it shouldn't show this. Pretend the horses folder isn't there. That's added later, and I thought I went back in time with git, but it didn't delete the folder when I went back in time. What a git. Yeah, I'm back in time. I'm a zero. I'm a zip. If I have this on GitHub, I'll put the link up later so you can go through the different steps. Pretend the horses folder isn't there. All it should generate is this horse trader. Oh no, wait a minute. Oh yeah, I didn't do it. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and do that again. Actually, I'll just copy it from actually, no. If you got a question right now, go ahead. This might take a second here. Right.
Are there ways of moving towards a forward path to make it scalable and better if you develop something you like it, but you have to?
Yeah. There's the biggest inefficiency in most web applications is database access, and I mean, but there's other obviously aspects where that can be an issue, like just calculations and rendering templates and everything. There's a whole bunch of tools that people have created to make Django more efficient. There's like you could integrate like a caching system to have your views templates pre-rendered, and you don't have to worry about re-rendering them every time somebody accesses the same web page. What I do if I have a heavily trafficked website, I'm on AWS. I just create a bunch of instances and create a bunch of daemons. So like I'll have like an instance with like 16 different Django daemons running. And that way, if 100 people access the server at the same time, they'll get, it's basically just, I just provide more resources to the application. I have heard, like, if you have something that's computationally heavy, and I've had an issue with some computationally heavy things like that biotech company, they need to analyze some data. I've integrated some other libraries like NumPy and Pandas to do the data analyzing because it's a C library running underneath, and it's so much faster than doing it in Python. And I know like Discuss, their web application that you see, the comments at the bottom of all the websites, is that's done in Django as well. And what they do for anything that requires a bunch of CPU cycles is they rewrite those particular pieces of their application in, I want to say it's in Go that they use, and they just integrate it with their Django application. So most web applications, I think you don't have to do that. For most database-driven websites, you're just getting data posted and you're just rendering a template. I think you can use caching, and if you have to, give it more processes, more workers, or more server instances in most cases, and that's relatively cost efficient. But in other cases, there's ways around it if you have something else that you just need to scale, and it has to be super cheap. But yeah, I've actually never had to do that, well, except for the NumPy's Pandas thing. I've never had to go beyond just creating a few more processes or adding an extra server instance, and that's always worked for me so far. So yeah. So I don't know if I should actually, okay, so it did create a, yep, so it did create my horse trader. So it creates this folder here. This is the basic structure. You can ignore PyCache. This is the settings folder. It has all of your application settings, which we'll modify in a little bit. URLs is how it does URL management, and WSGI is if you're using a WSGI-based server, so you can kind of ignore that for now. Manage.py, it doesn't look like much, but this is actually built into the Django core, so this will give us a lot of power to create apps later on. So to get started with this, all you have to do, if you've got the code on your system, and I have this on GitHub, I'll give you the link, is run docker compose up, and that will build the Docker containers and copy over requirements.txt and try to start the server. And there it goes. Let's see here. I should be connected to my internet. Yes, I am. And if you're doing this on your own machine, you may have to run docker compose, cancel it, and run docker compose, then close out of it and run docker compose restart, because the first time you run it, it's setting up the database Docker container, and that takes a while. And the web container that has Django on it will be up and running, and it'll be like, where's my database at? So you'll get an error. So that happens just, it's happened to me every single time. Actually, you have to Control-C and docker compose restart. But this time I already had the database up and running, so it just started it. So that's going to give you a very basic website on localhost port 8000, and it's just the default Django website. I don't even know where this code is that renders this template. It's probably in the Django core somewhere. This is obviously not my web page template code because I haven't put any HTML or CSS in. But it has a cool link here, the documentation. This is a great tutorial, by the way. So there's that, and that's how you start a Django project. But we're going to go a little bit more than that. We're going to create an app. So Django breaks up your code in this thing called apps, and that's not to be confused with another web app. You're not creating a different web app. The overall project structure is called a project in Django, and what you might call a module in other libraries or other frameworks, Django calls it an app. So when we say app, we're not creating a new web app. We're just creating a little module inside of our web app. And that looks like this, if I can get out of here. And I'm not going to run the commands. I'm just going to go to the git tag. Oh, I should have left that open. Oh well. Sometimes Docker takes a little bit of time to shut down and start. So you don't have to use Docker, because that can be a pain sometimes. What tag am I in? Git status. Nope, git. Tag git. Let's get rid of my changes. I'm going to check out version 0.2. Yes. Oh, I thought I did reset. The following untracked working tree files will be overwritten by checkout. Well, didn't I do reset? Huh. All right, so who's a Git pro here? What do I need to do to get rid of this? Dash what? Huh. That's funny. I can't just do. Okay, we'll just do that. Oh, I don't know why. Why did it create? Oh, I know why it created that. Okay. That's a directory. Yada da. What's wrong with me? Oh. No such file. They already. Okay. All right, I'm not going to run any more code on here. I'm just going to switch between. Oh, I thought I got to remove that. Manage by. Okay, we're just going to switch between my Git tags. I have the code to run, or the commands to run in the slides. Version 0.2.0. Yay, okay, so if you now run, where's my mouse? To start a new app, you run you run manage.py start app horses. We're going to create a new app called horses. That's where we're going to store our horses model data and the code we need to interact with the REST API. So we're going to call manage.py start app horses. We have to prepend it with our lovely alias script because we're using Docker. Normally we wouldn't have to do that. Then that'll create the folder, which looks like this. And actually, it's going to be in step 3 that has the folder. Yeah, that'll create the folder, which will look like this. It'll have an admin.py, a models.py, which is where you set up your database model, and a tests folder for doing automated tests, which is always very important. A views folder. And Django treats what you might call a controller in other frameworks, it calls it a view. So what you might call a view in other frameworks, Django calls it a template. So there's that naming convention you have to be aware of. All of the logic for generating the view goes in views.py, and the actual UI code that you might normally call a view goes in a folder called templates, which we're not going to do because we're going to create a REST API instead. But if you were going to create a traditional website, you would put your controller logic in views.py. And that's all addressed in the wonderful Django tutorial, which I won't go, which you can do on your own. It's really well written. So we create that. We are going to create a model to define what our horse's data should look like, and then we're going to run migrations. So the model for my horse is just this. It's all class-based here. So I'm drawing a blank here. Not subclass, but we extend, or whatever you want to call it, the Django models model class. And we're going to set up a few different breeds. I just chose some. I'm not a horse person, so don't ask me. I don't even know if I spelled these right. But we're going to create a list of breeds that they can choose from. And that'll be stored in our database as a car field. And you use Python code to define the database structure, but this also works in the web app to validate data. And it'll even work to generate like forms and such for you. So this is really cool because you don't have to create all the code to define your validation and forms in your logic code and then create a separate SQL script to make the database tables that match that. You can do it all in one go. So name, I should start at the top here. Name is our first database column, and it'll have a character field with max length 255 characters. Breed is going to be a character field, 255 characters, but we're going to make it a little bit more intelligent. We're going to say it's got to be one of these choices. So this is like an enumeration, a character enumeration, or enum, whatever you want to call it, for the database. And we can set default values. If somebody doesn't provide a value, it can go back to a default. Listing date is going to be a date time field, which is just like a date time field in the database. This auto now add flag set to true will mean whenever somebody creates a new entry in the database table, it will set the listing date to that moment in time. And price is going to be a decimal field because we don't want to use anything like a float field for money because we know how that can go sideways. And this string function down here is just for us to see if we go through something called Django Admin, which I'm going to show you in a second, we can see what our data models look like just by browsing the list view. So that's what a model looks like right there. And you would run these commands right here, manage by make migrations, manage by migrate, to affect those changes. Oops, I should put this bigger because you can't see that. Yeah.
So if you were SQL savvy and you want to add like index out, is there a way to do that?
There is. There's multiple ways to do things in Django. You can, for adding an index, there might actually be a flag you can use Python to, but if you really want to write raw SQL, there is a feature to write raw SQL. So what this does when it creates this make migrations command right here is it creates like, it's like pseudo, it's not really a, it's not SQL, it's like pseudo SQL, but so normally you don't edit these, but you can create an empty migration and you can put raw SQL in there. So you could, and then that way, when you install your or deploy your app, if you run make migrations or if you run migrate, it'll not only apply the changes from its pseudocode, but it'll apply your SQL code as well. So you still don't have to, so you can write raw SQL and not have to personally update the SQL database. You can just put it in an empty migration and let Django update the database. And if you put it in numerical order, it'll like this is 001. I don't know, you can't really see that. That's 001.initial.py, 002.py or whatever would be the next one that would run. So you can create empty migrations and put your raw SQL in there. Or you can, if you want to, you can learn Python's fancy language here, which is actually it's easier to put raw SQL probably. So there's a way to do that, and I have had to do that for that biotech company that had some weird characters. I had to change the character encoding of one of the tables, and I had to do it with raw SQL. So make migrations creates that file. Migrate actually converts that file to SQL and runs it. And if you have your own migrations, it'll run those as well in the numerical order that they are in the app folder. So now we have a data model. We have a database migration, which puts the database tables in our database for us. But Django gives us a little something extra. We can actually see our data without writing any code. So we haven't written any HTML or CSS. We haven't written any controller or view logic. But we can still see our data via the web because Django has a built-in thing called Django Admin. And I'm going to try. So first thing you have to do is, on that second bullet point, run manage py create superuser to create a superuser, which lets you put in your email and password and username. I've already done that, so I don't have to do that. But if you were doing this for the first time, you would run that to give yourself a superuser account. And then you also have to register your model with the admin.py file. So let me show you where that's at. So in admin.py, this is all you have to, I'm going to go to the next one. Is it 4? Yes, okay. So in admin.py, all you have to do is import your model, horse, and extend this model admin class, and you don't have to change anything actually. You just register your horse model with the default model admin class. You can do a lot more fancy stuff here, but for just viewing our data, that's all we need. So just this few lines of code to register our model with the Django admin site. And now, if I run docker compose up, hopefully this will work. Yes, it did. Okay, so now we can go to localhost :8000/admin, and you can change this URL address. And I'm already logged in. So this right here is the Django. It's really whitewashed, isn't it? But this is the Django admin website. I don't know if you can see it or not. At the very top, these two come for free. This is groups and users. And this is the model that we created with our Django class, the horses class. So you can actually come in here, and that string method denotes what this name looks like, but you can click on one of these and change the data. So we have a name field, a breed field, and a price field, and we can just change this as we want to. The listing date field isn't in here because it's automatically created by Django, but we can see it in the next step. This guy is going to be $600. There you go. So you can save, you can add a new horse. We'll go and create the OKC Python user group. What kind of horse would that be, you think? Appaloosa, all right. This guy's got to be at least 10,000. So there we go. There is our guy. So this is actually, this interface is done by Django for us. All we have to do is register our model, and this is inserting data into our database table. So it's really cool because if you're ever not sure why your data doesn't look right on your view or your template, you can come in here and look at the actual data and manipulate it if you need to, without having to write any forms or other validation, because this actually does validate based off of that model that we created. So if I tried to, for example, I should probably demonstrate that. If I tried to put something that's not numerical in here, oh, it's not even gonna let me because it's a number field. Let's change that to a text field. If I try to put something non-numerical in here and hit save, it would validate it for me. Enter a number. So I didn't have to write any validation code, but it knows that I can't save text into a number field. So that's a cool part about Django Admin, and that's all free. Yeah. So I think it's awesome. It provides customizable. You can customize this, by the way, but it's user-friendly interface to your data. It has, oh, I didn't even mention the user management and permissions management. So this is also part of Django. The free classes up at the top. Groups and users. You can create users, and it's actually quite a bit you can modify on here. This is probably bad to get some random person and access to this, but it's only running locally anyway. So just do, here we go. So you can set their names, you can determine if they're a staff, you can give them super user permissions. You can, this right here lets you fine grain what permissions they have, so you can make it so that way they can or cannot edit or view certain pieces of data. And these are built automatically based off of the registered models. So I could give this guy the ability to add a horse or to even edit a horse, but not give him the ability to delete a horse, for example. So it has this built-in permission management, which is pretty cool. So I want to make sure I mention that. Okay, so, oh, you can also extend this. I usually extend this with a third-party package called Django Reversion, which lets you keep track of changes and who made the change and when the change was made, and lets you go back in time to undo changes to data. It's a really cool package, but I'm not going to install it because it takes a while to set up. Django also offers advanced URL mapping. I'm not going to demonstrate that, but you can create regex expressions to map different URLs to different views. It has a predefined extensible base classes for your view logic, which, as I mentioned in other frameworks, is commonly called controller logic. But it automatically gives you these base classes you can use to create views for creating, updating, deleting, showing details and lists of your data models. And they're all extensible, so you can start off with the base, start off with something basic, and then add features as you go. It has an elegant HTML templating language. It does let you change it out for something like Jinja 2 or whatever you prefer, but it has a built-in templating language. And it includes web form security considerations like CSRF and other form validation features. And it does data validation based off your defined models. That's kind of what it does out of the box. So next thing I want to do real quick is talk about the REST framework magic. So this is not the main Django framework, but this is something I commonly use in conjunction with Django. It's called the Django REST framework. And to get it started, all you have to do is install it, add a little serializer, view set, and API routing configuration, and then run a migration. Actually, I don't think you need to do that even. But then you can have a REST API for your already defined Django models. So you say you got a website, you've made all your models for all your data, and suddenly somebody says, we want a REST API, you can do that. So let's go back here, open a new tab. Okay, so I'm going to check out. Version 0. Okay, so what we add here is a serializer. So we're importing the base serializers class from the REST framework. So, to install it, I don't know if I ever mentioned that. To install it, you just add, to your requirements.txt file, and then it'll run with pip install. So we create a serializer, and this is going to say, this is where you can customize how data is serialized. So let's say you want your REST API to not return listing date, or to not return the price, or to format the price with a $sign. You can override those fields in here and kind of specify how they're returned as JSON. And the view set, you can do more stuff here. You can create different API endpoints. By default, Django REST framework gives you all the credit. It gives you create, delete, update, and detail. API endpoints, which it just automatically generates for you, but you can add new ones, like if you want one that's like, horse update without being able to update price. You can make your own API endpoints to do that in the view sets, but I'm just going to go with the default ones here. You define a query set, and query set is how Django pulls data from the database. You can do a bunch of optimizations here. You can, if you have related tables, you can prefetch related tables and everything. We're not going to do that though. And then you just got to configure the router for Django REST framework. So it does something called a routers, which is different. Most of Django does URL routing. It calls it URLs. REST framework calls them routers, and then it integrates with the Django's URL patterns. So this is just a quick demonstration of how you would do that. We're not going to go over too much detail because I want to show you what it looks like. So without further ado, with that minimal amount of code and configuration, is it going to work? Oh, I already have it running, silly me. I have it running over here. Oh, no, it exited. Ah, ha, ha. Docker. I do Docker so that way I don't have to worry about issues while I'm demonstrating and then it doesn't work. Oh. Did I have this on restart? I don't think I did. All right, let's just see if we can get this running with Docker Compose up again. Oh, I can do Docker Compose restart. Let's see if that works for everybody. Yay, okay, we got our server again. Yes, we got our server again. Okay, cool. So what does that look like? Let's go to localhost 8000, and I put this on API/horses is where I define this to exist at. So this is not what it's supposed to look like. That's what it's supposed to look like. Okay. So this right here is the JSON. This I should probably explain. The REST framework interpreted that we were accessing this API endpoint from a web browser. So as opposed to just returning raw JSON, it returned a HTML documentation of the JSON response. So this would be what the response would be if you access this from a regular mobile client or from the shell. It would return this array with this JSON data, and it's got our name, our breed, our listing date, time, and the price for all of our horses. And it's really cool because you can interact with this documentation. You can create a new horse straight from the documentation. So we'll create Sally. I don't know how much that is. It's a lot of money, I think. And it'll let me create a post, or let me emulate a post right here from the web documentation. You can do it with raw JSON data or the HTML form. So it lets you, view all your horses, add horses, and edit, update, delete, etc. And it gives you this beautiful web documentation. And of course, this will work if you do it from the command line shell. I do have this set, so I have to be logged in, so I'm not going to demonstrate it from the command line shell, but you can make it public API. We don't have to be logged in. It includes other authentication methods like tokens and OAuth you can set up, but we're not going to go over that. So it can give you a full production-ready REST API with just a little bit of configuration and added code. And that is the Django REST framework. And one of the reasons I really love Django. So if you want to learn more, you can go to the official tutorial. It talks about models, and it goes into views and templates, so you can see how to create web pages and forms. And it also goes into automated testing, which is great that the official tutorial talks about test-driven development a little bit. And if you want to look at best practices for writing Django code, 2 Scoops of Django is an excellent book, and I have the link here. And the docs for the Django project are really good. So if you ever just want to browse through what the capabilities are, I recommend going to the documentation. There's oftentimes code samples and all the information you think you might need to get started creating a web app with Django. And that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
As a freelancer, what would you advise us if we wanted to manage ourselves as freelancers?
Okay.
Be your number one or number three tips.
Yeah.
Top 5. Top 1 is sufficient.
Well, my top one tip is spend some time writing a contract and convincing yourself that you're not going to do work until your client signs this contract that says something like payment will be rendered within 15 days of invoice date. Otherwise, a 10% late fee will be added, something like that. Because if you don't do something like that, you'll find that clients will start paying later and later, and you'll have some cash flow issues. So my number one recommendation for people who want to get started freelancing: come up with a solid plan for receivables invoicing. Get an online invoicing platform like Zoho Invoice or whatever you want to use that allows online payment. And in fact, if you can get your clients to not mail checks and force them to sign a contract that says they will pay via ACH or credit card on an online platform by a certain date or automatically be charged a late fee, that would be a way to go. Because that's very important. Cash flow is most important. As a freelancer, I have not really worried so much about finding work. I did initially, but after a little bit of just reaching out, I'm at the point where I never worry about finding work. My most important concern is always receivables, which kind of sucks, 'cause I don't really like doing billing. But so yeah, number one recommendation is get a good plan for invoicing and receivables. And number two is I mean, there's a lot of people who need custom app development. They need tech people. And a lot of people are willing to pay a lot to have a contractor as opposed to hiring a full-time employee, because a contractor, they may only need somebody for like 3 months, or maybe they only need somebody for 1 month. Maybe they need somebody for several years, but in either case, it's easier to hire a contractor, and then when the contract ends, just let that happen naturally, than it is to hire an employee and have that continual salary requirement and all the other healthcare requirements and everything. So you have a value. So when you're going out there looking for clients, remember that you have this value and charge more than you would hourly, because they are getting a major benefit by not hiring you as an employee. So by you being a contractor, you're providing them a major benefit. So you make sure your hourly rate reflects that benefit. Yeah, there's some good, yeah.
So, in that vein, headhunters are kind of incentivized to get you hired.
Yeah.
So, is there a different headhunter or type of headhunter or place to go if you're specifically looking for contracts?
Yeah, so there's two different kinds of contracting. There's contracting where you're just working 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, at the client's location, and there's contracting where you're out there, you're finding your own clients, you're setting your own rates, and you usually have more than one client at a time. Like I have like 3 clients at a time usually, and sometimes more. But so I don't work with recruiters to find those clients. I'm usually finding them on, I found one really good client. It's kind of funny. It was on Craigslist because they wanted this short-term job to increase the security of their website. And they just put this kind of random ad on Craigslist. And this was when I was kind of starting out. And I responded to it. And after I saw the code base, I realized they needed more than a half day's worth of work. And I've been working with them now for over a year. So you go out and find them. You know, you can use Craigslist, you can use LinkedIn Pro Finder. I would not recommend anything like Thumbtack or Freelance or, yeah, like most of those websites where you're competing with an international community, people just want the absolute cheapest and they don't care about quality. So you're not going to really find any good gigs on those sites. But people who are out there looking for consultants on LinkedIn Pro Finder, Craigslist. I'm also going to put a shameless plug here. If you guys get together and form like a consulting company, I'm working with a startup called SourcePanel, and they actually work with small consulting groups and large enterprises who need people for short-term projects. Like they need somebody to they do both coding and networking and other IT stuff. Like somebody needs to upgrade all their servers. They need some people who are Cisco certified for 2 weeks, whatever. SourcePanel kind of matches them to priority groups in their area. So if you guys get together and form like a business of consultants and you want to offer your services in Oklahoma, you know, feel free to sign up as a provider resource here on SourcePanel. But there's things like, there are organizations like SourcePanel. I know there's one in Omaha, I forget what it's called, but there's a big tech association in Omaha that they kind of match consultants with enterprises and other businesses that need consultants. And word of mouth is really important too. So when you get a client, or if you have existing people you work with, make sure you mention that, hey, I'm now doing this as a professional. If you want me, I'll be available Monday through Friday. You know, during normal business hours, you can just give me a call and tell me what you want done, and I'll see if I can get it done for you. Because when I started off freelancing kind of on the side, and there's a different when you're doing it part-time versus full-time. When you're full-time, you're much more valuable because you can be there when they need you, when you're a full-time consultant. When you're doing it part-time, then it's like, well, I'll do it as soon as I can, and if there's a fire or whatever, they can't depend on you. But so when you're consulting full-time, it's kind of, you are providing extra value to companies too, because you're not their employee, but you can be there if they need you. So, I don't know, yeah, just word of mouth, searching the internet. Yeah, that was probably a winded answer, sorry. Any other questions? Okay, well, great, thanks.